What's up, my fellow Shield Brothers? Shield Brother 6 here with your weekly dose of history, and today we'll be talking about Fort Sumter in South Carolina is attacked on April 12, 1861, which begins the American Civil War, one of the longest, bloodiest, and saddest conflicts in American history. So let's get started for the day. Fort Sumter. Well, Fort Sumter is an island fortification located in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. It was originally constructed in 1829 as a coastal garrison. Fort Sumter was first built in the wake of the War of 1812, which highlighted the United States' lack of strong coastal defenses and military, which I spoke about briefly in my Monday's video. Named for Revolutionary War general and South Carolina native Thomas Sumter, Fort Sumter was one of nearly 50 forts built as part of this so-called Third System, a coastal defense program implemented by Congress in 1817. The three-tiered, five-sided fort's complex coastal placement was designed to allow it to control access to the vital Charleston Harbor, which it did very well. While the island itself was only 2.4 acres, the fort was built to accommodate a garrison of 650 men and 135 artillery pieces. U.S. Major Robert Anderson occupied the unfinished fort in December 1860, following South Carolina's secession from the Union, initiating a standoff with the state's militia forces. So what caused this standoff? What was the reason behind this? Well, the straw that kind of broke the camel's back was the election of Abraham Lincoln in November 1860. Brought to a head the issue of slavery in the United States. 7 southern states seceded from the Union rather than continue negotiation and compromise with a government they felt would be hostile to their rights as states and what they were trying to do as statehood and what they believed was their right as states to be able to do. The first to secede was, of course, South Carolina on December 20th, 1860. By February of 1861, 6 more states had joined the new Confederate States of America. With their secession declarations came the demand that all United States property be turned over to those states, including military property, to do as they wished, since they were now newly found independent. The new Lincoln administration sought not to provoke armed conflict, but refused to surrender federal installations to the Confederates. Instead, Lincoln chose to resupply Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor and other forts when required. But negotiations would continue in Charleston with Confederate General Pierre G.T. Beauregard in command of the Confederate forces there and Major Robert Anderson, the Sumter garrison commander. The talks failed to resolve tension, forcing Beauregard to action, causing the conflict. Early in the morning of April 12, 1861, Confederate guns around the harbor opened fire on Fort Sumter. At 2:30 on the next day of April 13th, Major Robert Anderson, the garrison commander, surrendered the fort and was evacuated the next day. The Union would not recapture Fort Sumter for nearly 4 years. This was a very short conflict. It only lasted a day and there was no casualties, which is very rare when 50 plus heavy artillery pieces are raining held down upon a fort. But anyway, that's the rarity with this. So, following Beauregard's bombardment in 1861, Confederate forces occupied Fort Sumter and used it to marshal a defense of Charleston Harbor. Once it was completed and better armed, Fort Sumter allowed the Confederates to create a valuable hole in the Union blockade in the Atlantic seaboard, which causes this long line of aftershocks. The first Union assault on Fort Sumter came in April 1863, when Rear Admiral Samuel Francis DuPont attempted a naval attack on Charleston. Commander of the Southern Atlantic Blockading Squadron, DuPont arrived in Charleston with a fleet of 9 ironclad warships, 7 of which were actually updated versions of the famed USS Monitor, which I talked about in my later video. While DuPont had hoped to recapture Fort Sumter, by then a symbol of the Confederate rebellion, his attack was poorly coordinated and met with unfavorable weather and conditions. In collaboration with Fort Sumter, Confederate batteries commanded by PGT Beauregard again hammered the ironclad fleet with artillery fire and underwater mines, which posed a constant threat to the ship's hulls. Outgunned, outmaneuvered, and outmanned, and unable to properly maneuver in heavy currents, DuPont's fleet eventually withdrew from the harbor after taking over 500 hits by heavy Confederate guns. Only 1 Union soldier was killed during the battle, but one of the ironclads, the Kukuk, sank the next day from the damage sustained. 5 Confederates were killed during the attack, but the damage to Fort Sumter was soon repaired and its defenses improved. The Confederate soldiers even managed to salvage one of the Kukuk's 11-inch Dahlgren guns, and mount it on the fortress, giving them even more firepower. In the July of 1863, Union troops tried to lay siege to Fort Wagner, a valuable post on Morris Island, near the mouth of Charleston Harbor nearby to Fort Sumter. After being met with heavy fire from Fort Sumter, Union General Quincy Adams Gilmore turned his guns on the fort and unleashed a devastating 7-day bombardment. On September 8th, a force of nearly 400 Union soldiers attempted to land at Fort Sumter and capture the post by force. Union Rear Admiral John Dahlgren mistakenly believed the fort was manned by a skeleton crew, but the landing party was met by over 300 Confederate infantry, well armed and well fed, and they easily repulsed the Union attack. Following the failed infantry attack, Union forces on Morris Island recommended their a bombing campaign on Fort Sumter. Over the next 15 months, Union artillery effectively leveled Fort Sumter. It decimated the fort, just pulverized it for 15 whole months. It eventually fired over 50,000 projectiles at the fort between September 1863 and February of 1865. Despite suffering over 300 casualties from the Union bombardments, the beleaguered Confederate garrison managed to retain control of the fort until February 1865. Only when Union General William T. Sherman was poised to capture Charleston did the Confederates finally evacuate. Union forces would reclaim Fort Sumter on February 22, 1865. Robert A. Anderson and Abner Doubleday, the two commanding officers from the original siege on Fort Sumter, would both return to the fortress on April 14, 1865 for a flag-raising ceremony for the Union. So what's the importance of this? Well, the importance is Fort Sumter was the domino that started the long, bloody conflict known as the American Civil War, one of the saddest and one of the most intense wars we have ever been involved in. And it also, the Fort Sumter itself was a symbol of hope and a symbol of resistance to the Confederate fighters. It meant a lot to them, and it was also a sign that as citizens they could rise up and defend what they thought was right. The importance of Fort Sumter and the beginning of the American Civil War delves into many different realms and is very deep. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Shield Brother 6, and as always, I thank you for watching. If you like this kind of content, go ahead and leave me a like. If you do not, you can leave me a dislike. If you have a comment, suggestion, or concern, you can leave those comments, suggestions, or concerns down for me below in that comment section for me. And as always, I've been Shield Brother 6, and I'll catch y'all next time.